Hi, welcome to the special meeting of Brisbane Planning Commission, Thursday, October 1st, 2015, 7:30 Brisbane City Hall, 50 Park Place, Brisbane. Note, the special meeting will be preceded by an informal computer tutorial that was held earlier and presented by Commissioner Anderson. Hopefully that was useful, and please let us know if you would like maybe perhaps a repeat of that, and or you can watch that if you missed it earlier. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Anderson?
Present.
Commissioner Doe?
Present.
Commissioner Manier?
Here.
Commissioner Parker?
Here.
Commissioner Reinhardt?
Here.
Can we have a motion to adopt the agenda, please?
I make a motion to adopt the agenda.
I second that.
All in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Wonderful. So we're on to the new business. Before we proceed there, we would like to share with the public and remind the public of what we discussed at the tail end of the last Thursday's meeting about potentially setting some sort of framework and ground rules. So again, welcome and thank you very much for being engaged in our very, very important discussion. The format will be that we have the staff report first, and then we have commission questions. We're asking that the commission, as reminded by last meeting, that it stays very relevant to clarification questions, and we really, really want to lead this for the public comment. We really want to make it public collection time. And so we would ask that the commission refrain from asking questions that may go into a deliberation mode, because our deliberations are the two last sessions after our public hearing. So again, we're going to focus on the public hearing portion. And then right after that, we'll open the public hearing. Adopted PC rules call for meetings to end at 10:30 unless extended. So the goal is to allow the public to fully participate in the hearings and have their say in a manner that is respectful of everybody's time and scope of the task. Meetings can be extended. It can be continued to another night if there is a need. And so I guess at the end of today's going to be sort of our litmus test to see what works best for our community. And after that, we can determine what to do in terms of moving forward. In terms of the organization, could I have a show of hands of how many people plan to speak tonight? Okay.
A dozen.
6, 7. Yeah, about a dozen, half a dozen.
Or maybe
A little bit more, maybe eight. And could I have an idea of how many minutes? So we were thinking that to try to maximize inclusion, we would have those who have shorter comments go first, and then kind of a median, and then the longer comments towards the end. So we were thinking shorter comments were around 1 minute or so. Could I see a show of hands of 1 minute? 3, okay. And perhaps a median of 3 minutes? 1. And about 5 minutes.
One more. 5 plus. Let them go over.
3. So it looks
Right.
like we have a total of 7
Right.
speakers. We would like to ask that you be reminded that, again, for inclusionary purposes, we would like you to respect everyone's time. So if your time is up, we're going to ask that you wait to come back around until everyone gets a chance to speak. And, of course, the individual speakers will, if you need extended time, please feel free to let us know. And could I have everyone's show of hands who did everybody get a card, a speaker card? If you have one, could you please turn it into the staff so they can have it for the record? It's just easier for a written record to have your name, and we want to make sure we spell it right and have everything accurate for the record. Thank you so much. Okay. So just some very basic reminders. As a courtesy to your fellow citizens, please adhere to the time limits established by the Planning Commission. And again, that is going to be adjustable according to what our community is needing. Thank you. Secondly, please address the questions and comments to the Commission. And Thirdly, please keep the comments to the topics under consideration at tonight's meeting, which is going to be biological resources and cultural resources. And as a reminder, we have 7 public hearings, and at each hearing is broken down to segments so that it's digestible and meaningful during our conversation. If someone has already made a comment that you're going to make, please state your support of the previous comment, and there's no need to repeat it so that we can move forward efficiently. The purpose of the hearing is to allow everyone to make their own comments. It is not a debate. We want to include everyone, and we would like to remind everyone that if there is something that spurs an idea because someone else made a comment, feel free to add to that if there's some elucidating or enlightening thought that you can share with us. But again, please refrain from being repetitious. And also, please refrain from critiquing your fellow neighbors' comments because they are just as entitled to their comments as you are to yours. So, friendly reminder. With that, we are going to have public hearing, Brisbane Baylands Final Environmental Impact Report and related planning applications, the Baylands concept plans, the Baylands specific plan, the general plan amendment case GP-01-06. Specific topics include biological and cultural resources. Universal Paragon Corporation, UPC, is the applicant. Owners are various, APN various.
You have to make a motion to open the public hearing.
Oh, yes, I was just going to read that.
Yeah.
That's
Could we get the staff presentation before
yes,
you?
please.
Yes, thank you. I'll turn the presentation over to Lloyd Zola.
Thank you, Lloyd.
And I promise it will not be as long as the first presentation, the first workshop. Tonight is really for the public, and what we'll be talking about tonight, and this will be kind of the focus of and the structure of the public hearings as we go through them. Tonight we'll be talking primarily about biological and cultural resources, and the presentation I'll go through tonight will be the same as the others. We'll summarize the EIR conclusions and the mitigation measures. So give you a setting, identify what the impacts of all that development that's being proposed are, what mitigation measures are set forth in the EIR, and then talk about major issues. The major issues primarily are those raised by the public in their review of the draft EIR. So we'll focus on those tonight. And then we'll talk about the planning implications. What does the biological and cultural resources, or what do those resources mean in terms of the planning recommendation you as a commission will be asked to make at the end? How does biological, the habitats affect land use? How do the cultural resources affect land use? And we'll talk about that, and then it will be time for public input. And the public input, we would hope, would be of 2 different types. One would be comments on the EIR, the final EIR, things that the public would like to know, things that they believe should have been addressed, corrections they believe should have been made, but also to look at tonight how biological resources ought to shape land use. There were a number of recommendations made in the comments on the draft EIR about areas that ought to be preserved, and so we'd be looking for those kinds of comments also from the public. How should cultural resources shape land use? How should biological resources shape land use? And then next week we will go through the same structure and talk about hazards and hazardous materials, the contamination that's on the site, geologic hazards, water quality, how does that shape land use? We will, following that on October 13th, talk about traffic and circulation as well as noise. How does that shape your land use decisions? Following that, October 22nd, air quality, greenhouse gas, energy resources, again the same structure. Then on the 29th of October, we'll look at public services, recreation, and utilities and service systems and water supply. So that's where we'll discuss the proposed water agreement. November 4th, coming to the end of the topical issues, we'll talk about aesthetics and talk directly about land use. Now, in each of the hearings, land use is an appropriate subject, But in that case, we'll talk about essentially trying to wrap up the land use impacts and compatibility with the rest of the community. Tonight, the focus would be on how does biology, how do cultural resources shape land use? And then finally, wrapping up on the 12th of November with applicant and community presentations, and then kind of a summary of all the issues for the commission. Does that make sense as the structure?
Yes.
Yeah.
So tonight I'll start off talking about biological resources. And just a quick summary of the types of habitats that are found within the site. There are freshwater wetlands, the wetlands being along the creek, at the edge of the lagoon, and some other areas that are low-lying spots where water has gathered. There are tidally influenced areas, which are focusing on the lagoon, and terrestrial habitats, land habitats, which cover the majority of the site. The influences that have created the biology that you see today. One is the reality that the majority of the baylands were filled in. This is not natural ground that existed from time immemorial. Bayshore Boulevard is called Bayshore Boulevard because that was just about the shoreline. And with the exception of Ice House Hill and some other areas to the far northwest of the site, the entirety of the baylands was filled in over time. And it was filled in after the 1906 earthquake because there was lots of rubble. It was filled in to create the railroad yard. It was filled in to create the land that eventually became the landfill. And what that means in terms of biology is Ice House Hill developed a natural habitat that then human intervention impacted. Over the rest of the site, the biological habitats grew up in and around the landfill. They grew up in and around the rail yard. And so over large parts of the site, you have pieces of habitat that grew in and around the uses and development on the site rather than what you would typically see, which is development came into an area and removed habitat, and what's left is now the naturalized habitat. Now, that isn't to say that the habitats that are there are not important, that they're not sensitive, but just the history of how they got there is part of the background that we wanted the Commission to understand. Now, the impacts to biological resources, and the sensitive resources, I should say, Ice House Hill and the plants there and the butterfly habitats, the lagoon and the tidal influence areas, as well as the riparian areas that are on the site, riparian areas that are naturalized from the creek, as well as some that are simply low-lying spots where drainage has collected in and around the development. But the impacts that you will see to habitat on the site, one is there are trails proposed on Ice House Hill. The construction of those trails has the potential to impact the habitats on Ice House Hill. We'll talk about mitigation measures in a minute, but those trails will themselves have impacts. So it's not like open space is always good. Open space and trails and recreation has no impacts. In this case, the trails can have a significant impact on the habitats in Ice House Hill. Site remediation, and we'll talk about contamination remediation specifically next week, but the remediation that needs to go on the site over the flat lands in the rail yard, the closure of the landfill, those activities will impact biological habitats. When you add grading, that needs to occur so that you can get a usable platform for future development, as well as remediating the hazards that are there. What that means is substantially nearly all of the habitats on site, with the exception of Ice House Hill and in and around the lagoon, will be impacted by those remediation and grading activities. And that is a significant impact regardless of the level of development, the types of land uses you ultimately recommend. The act of remediation and the grading necessary will impact the habitats regardless of the land uses you select. There are also impacts that are kind of an interesting one, and that is the renewable energy facilities have their own particular impacts. Windmills result in bird strikes, and that is one of the impacts of having windmills on the site, whether they are large ones or whether they are smaller building-mounted ones or smaller ground-mounted ones. There is the potential for bird strikes, and the science of mitigating bird strikes is not very well established, and so that has been identified as a significant impact. And even with the mitigation measures that are available, the current state of the technology is not adequate to say there will be less than significant impacts after you provide mitigation in relation to bird strikes. The other one that I find amazing, especially when, to me, it's so obvious, if you have a tall building, we all know there's a building there. But they will result, those tall buildings, as they get up to 100 feet and higher, will result in bird strikes. So when we get buildings that are encroaching into the heights that birds fly, there will be bird strikes into those buildings, and there are impacts related to that. There are a number of key mitigation measures to consider as we move forward into the land use implications. But there are mitigation measures in the EIR specifically addressing the trails on Ice House Hill. Basically saying the trails need to be sited in a way that do not impact the host plants for the butterflies. And the trails need to be designed in a way that you don't create grading that impacts those habitats. And the other realization as part of the implementation of those mitigation measures, if trails cannot be designed to avoid or lessen those impacts to the habitats of the butterfly, then the recommendation is no trails on Ice House Hill. So in terms of priorities in the environment, the EIR is saying the habitats of the butterfly are a higher priority than the recreational trails. The other set of mitigation measures deal with impacts to birds and avian species. There are mitigation measures related to tree removal. The site is on the Pacific Flyway, and there are raptors and the birds, and as they nest on their and roost, subject to the provisions of the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. And so there are provisions in the EIR mitigation measures, and we have them listed on the PowerPoint, that deal with tree removal and not impacting special status species as they move through the site. There are also mitigation measures related to bird strikes, and this is the place that the mitigation measures talk about solar facilities and how they should be designed, design standards and criteria dealing with bird strikes in the windmills, and those mitigation measures. There are also mitigation measures related to protection of riparian and sensitive habitats, and I'll talk about two of the really key ones in a second. The basic mitigation measure and the basic performance standard for whenever dealing with riparian habitat is no loss of habitat value. That is not no loss of acreage, but no loss of value. And that's why you will see a lot of times mitigation measures that will say when you need to remove an acre of wetland, you must replace with X number, which will always be 1 or greater. And so that is done through a delineation process and an evaluation process to start laying out what is it that's impacted, what is it that's being replaced, and how do we get to that. The key mitigation measures that I wanted to talk about tonight and make sure the Commission and the public understand is one mitigation measure 4.C-4A. What this mitigation measure calls for is a project-wide open space plan. And the basic performance standards that that plan must meet is to provide a mosaic of native coastal scrub, grassland, willow scrub habitats, but to provide that in a contiguous area. Right now we've got pieces around. In a contiguous area, and also to provide for east-west habitat connections between the upland habitats and the bay, and to provide for north-south habitat connections. The finding of the EIR was that there will be a significant impact in relation to habitat connectivity, and this mitigation measure is intended to deal with that connectivity. Here is the key planning implication of this mitigation measure. It does not presuppose that the pattern of open space and the pattern of development existing in all the four development scenarios stays the same. The preparation of this project-wide open space plan to meet these performance standards may result in a recommendation of saying those patterns need to change, that to provide connectivity, the open space pattern now recommended in the DSP scenario, the open space patterns suggested and recommended in the community prepared plan need to change in order to develop this pattern of open space. So what that means again in terms of environmental priorities is that meeting these performance standards is a higher priority than the land uses need to stay just like they are on one of those scenarios. The other mitigation measure that is also key here is 4.C-4B, which calls for a marsh wildlife and habitat protection plan that specifically talks about the marsh habitats in and around the lagoon, as well as the freshwater habitats that exist, for example, along the creek and some other areas. Key things here is not just preserve habitat areas, but restore areas in and around the lagoon to protect those habitat areas from night lighting. And modern technology is amazing what you can do with directing light downward and creating a lighted area and a very tight buffer area and then a very dark area. And there are examples of that. Caltrans has done a lot of that in some of their routes in Southern California where they're going through and take a freeway through a habitat area. Freeway is lit and you get the habitat area 10, 15 feet off of there. It's dark. So there is that kind of mitigation measure that says as we design land use, that the lighting for the developed area shall not shine into those open space areas. And that becomes part of designing a lighting program. Also creating creating buffers and separating preserved areas from developed areas. And that's also part of that mitigation measure, as well as education programs for the public. The key issues raised in the EIR, I'm sure people will speak to these as we go on. One question, the use of the 2010 baseline. The draft EIR identifies 2010 as the baseline, and we'll talk about this next week in relation to traffic. But 2010, so the impacts identified in the EIR are measured by the change from 2010. So the changes of development from what existed in 2010 are defined as the impact, and that's what CEQA says how we are to do that. So activities that occurred before 2010 are part of the baseline of this EIR. So the EIR does not go backwards in time and say, somebody modified some habitat in 2000 whatever, but before 2010, and we need to now require mitigation for what somebody did prior to the time that the 2010 NOP went out for public review. CEQA does not give you the ability to go back and fix things that occurred before the baseline year. Now that is not to say that when you make your recommendations, look at the land uses that are proposed, look at the site and what it will take to be consistent with your general plan policies. So there is the limitation in CEQA that we cannot fix past activities, but your general plan can be implemented. And we'll help you through that balance when you look at the site and start looking at how you want to see preservation areas, development areas, and what you want to see go on in those protection areas. There were also comments raised in the draft EIR in relation to there should have been more detailed analysis in the EIR of biological resources. And keep in mind, and this will be a theme that runs throughout most of the subjects, the draft EIR is a program document. It is intended to be a upfront analysis of what may occur, what is proposed to occur within the Baylands over the next 20 years. And we need to realize that in terms of biology, it will change over 20 years. There will be a natural progression over 20 years of habitat types. There will be a natural progression with, as we'll talk about this in a second, as areas get wet, as they dry out, we will see our wetlands areas expand and contract. And so what the EIR calls for and what CEQA calls for is with each site-specific development that follows the EIR, there will be subsequent analyses for those, and one of the determinations that will need to be made with each individual project is, do we need new biological resources studies? As part of federal and state permitting and regulatory agency permitting, as that is required, those will require new surveys to meet those permit requirements. So we are expecting that there is now an overall reconnaissance survey that identifies habitat types, that in this EIR is used to set basic performance standards, and then there will be subsequent analyses to determine how do we apply the performance standards we set up front to very specific pieces of ground as developments are planned, and now we can see the building goes here, and there are very specific lines of what is building, what is landscape, what does grading look like. The last issue that was raised, or the third issue that was raised in terms of wetland, was wetlands expand and contract over time. And the concern that was raised in a number of letters is that the wetland discussion that was in the EIR did not describe wetlands that people have seen in the past. That there are areas that showed wetland characteristics in the past that are not either not acknowledged in the EIR, but it changes over time. So one of the things that is in the final EIR, part of the one of the master responses, is looking at aerial photography over the past 20 years and looking at, for example, a dry year, 2012, a wet year, 2010, or I'm sorry, a dry year in 2012, an average year about 2007, and a wet year, 2010, looking at how wetlands have changed over time. The final EIR compares that 20-year average to that which is shown as wetland on the graphic that is in the EIR and is attached to your staff report. The EIR's identification of wetland is roughly similar to the 20-year average. And so the mitigation measures for wetlands are wetlands will be mitigated based on the larger of either what the feds and the state will do with their permitting, a wetland delineation that's taken at the time. So wetland delineation taken in a dry year will be smaller than the average that's in the EIR. The EIR requires mitigation to that average, basically the graphic that's in the EIR. If development is proposed following a series of wet years, which is hard to contemplate now, but it will occur eventually. But if development will occur following a wet year where wetlands are larger than that average, the mitigation will be applied to the larger area. So you will never see mitigation less than the wetlands as identified in the EIR, even if it's a very dry year and a delineation would show a smaller area. The basic planning considerations as we start wrapping up biology is there are two very important natural habitats on this site, Icehouse Hill and the lagoon. There are very clear protections for those areas to be preserved in place. And as I said earlier, that activity of remediation and grading will affect large habitats throughout the site. But the opportunity that creates is to design as part of the marsh plan, as part of the open space plan, to actually enhance the biological values of the site, to look at your general plan policies and set a standard that what we want to see out of the biology and out of the development of this is something better than exists today. So there's the opportunity to enhance the biological values of the central drainage channel, to reconfigure what are now discontiguous pieces of open space into an integrated and more sustainable mosaic of habitats and create those connections across the site and put that all together. And what it suggests is a land use pattern that pushes development north on the site, that would say we need to cluster development more to the north and minimize development to the south, clustering development or clustering open space more to the south. So that's what the biological resources logical outcome is. We'll talk about other issues that may take you other directions later in subsequent hearings.
I have a question. By central drainage channel, do you mean Guadalupe Creek?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. We'll talk about cultural resources. That same issue of the progressive filling of the bay means that there are not archaeological resources on the majority of the site. The baylands, as you see it now, simply did not exist pre-European times, with the exception of Icehouse Hill and some areas to the north. There are significant historical features related to the rail yard, but archaeological features are not really present on the site. It's not a sensitive site for archaeology. This is a 1911 photo, and I found this really interesting because this shows the start of the rail yard, 1911, and what you see at the right is not the freeway, that is what's now the rail line. And so what we would see at the right of this photograph is today the former landfill. And so that is part of the illustration of the filling of the bay and the way in which now historic features kind of crowd out or that archaeological resources aren't really present. The roundhouse is the primary historic feature on the site. It is defined under CEQA as a historic resource for two very specific reasons. This building is on the National Register of Historic Places. As a result of that, it is also on the California Register. And so under CEQA, this is a significant historic resource. The reality of that building, for anybody who's seen it, is it's been very severely damaged by fire, and over time it is deteriorating as it sits there. The other building on site, there is the Lazari Charcoal Building, which, when you apply CEQA criteria to that building, is not defined on a historic resource. It's not on the State Register of Historic Places, not on the Federal Register. It doesn't have the physical integrity of the way it was designed originally. There have been a lot of modifications to it. The context of what made it historic is gone, unlike the roundhouse where you still understand the context of that. The context of this building is gone. And so it doesn't qualify under CEQA. Yet, because this building is recognized as being very important to the community as a historic resource, each of these scenarios propose restoration and reuse of this building. So this is one of those places where CEQA says not significant, but from a planning standpoint comes to a different conclusion. That is perfectly valid kind of conclusion. The third historic building is the Machinery and Equipment Building. This is a historic resource under CEQA. It retains its integrity. This is surrounded by the baylands, but it's not a part of the baylands itself. It will become important in terms of the design of land use around it, but regulations and mitigation measures related to this building are not included in the EIR because it's not in the actual baylands. Now, we also looked at the other features and remnants, whether they are significant, requiring mitigation measures. Things like railroad ties, spikes, tracks that are left are not historically significant. The basic criteria is, would they add to the knowledge of history and the history of railroads in California. They're really not going to. So they're not going to yield new significant information, and because so much of the rail yard has been removed over time, so little of it remains, it's been so altered, and so few of the characteristics that would define something historic are gone, we were asked to look at as part of the final EIR, does this qualify as a cultural landscape, a historic district, and it would not. So what we're looking at in terms of history is the three buildings. Now, the mitigation measures that are proposed deal with the roundhouse building. Two things need to be done. One, in the short term, stabilize that building. Left as it is, with nothing done to it, it will eventually deteriorate and collapse. It is just deteriorating as it sits there today. Whether it's not reused for 20 years, action needs to be taken just to keep it standing. Then, as development occurs, there would be a requirement for a specific rehabilitation plan and for reuse of that building. And so the other mitigation measures is dealing with the historic context of those buildings. So then the historic context means not just preserve the building, the roundhouse, not just preserve the machinery building, but the development that goes adjacent to it needs to respect that context. So you don't have, I'll use a crude term, big hulking buildings hiding the roundhouse. The development would be set back to a distance, lower in stature, less bulk, so that the roundhouse stands out as a historic feature, so that the machinery and equipment building is not swamped by new development. The other thing to keep in mind as a planning concept is not just looking at the developments surrounding those, but that if ultimately your recommendation is not to approve development that would result in the rehabilitation, reuse of the roundhouse, essentially a double negative if you're, or one of the things we said as a potential outcome is you recommend not approving any of the plans. Something to consider that really ought to be done in that standpoint is something needs to be done to stabilize that building in the absence of no approvals that you can apply a mitigation measure to, because that building will not survive left as it is. And so with that, if there are any questions, otherwise we're ready for the public. I'll go back.
I don't have any further questions.
This presentation is very useful. Is there a way we can have it online so people can access it?
Yes.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Yeah, the staff will be posting all of the presentations
Excellent.
as we go.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I'll keep scrolling back.
Okay. So does the Planning Commission have any questions of our consultant?
I don't have any question, but I do have a request. Can we separate the biological and cultural separately? Look at it first biological, then cultural, and then maybe come back with combined?
Yes, that was our intention. Makes sense. Any other questions?
No.
So since we don't have any questions, can we have a motion to open to the public hearing?
I'll motion to open the public hearing.
I
Second.
second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Okay, so we actually received 11. Did anyone else have anything they want? Could you please give it to the staff? We want to include everyone. And only one person put about how many minutes they would need, and we're trying to keep it to a hierarchy so that we can include everyone. So could I have the people who turned in speaker cards for 1 minute come up first? So I guess you know who you are, and I'll pull it as it goes because it's not identified on here.
Come on down.
Tom Hines, longtime resident. I'm going to pass for now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Menelik Michael, I'm a new resident, but I also have, I think I'm going to pass because it doesn't relate to tonight's topic.
Okay,
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Good evening, I'm Nori Java, and I am a consultant for the developer Universal Paragon. And I really just wanted to point out that we do have consultants, Biohabitats, and they are planning to come back for a presentation to the Ecology and Open Space Committee on details of their plan. I just wanted to make a note of that. It was supposed to be in October. It looks like it'll now be either a special meeting or at their November meeting, but I just wanted to make sure that the Commission was aware of that. And so that's going to be a discussion about the transitional wetlands planned. So I encourage all of you to attend that.
Thank you.
Is there any possible way we can combine it with the Planning Commission?
I'm sorry?
Can we
Yeah,
have a
that's
joint
fine with
meeting?
me. Their presentation
Excuse
is
me,
about 20 minutes.
through the chair.
I think, yeah.
Could we, maybe that's a discussion for after you take the public testimony?
Right. So we're going to try to keep it so that the public testimony comes first. Anyone else with about a minute? No? Anyone a minute to 3 minutes? Please step forward.
Ironically, I'm one of the last people to give you the permission, the request for speaking. Anyway, my name is Carol Soltowski, and I live in Brisbane on Humboldt Road. And I'm going to talk about my credentials first very briefly. I am a licensed veterinarian, and I won't tell you the year I graduated from veterinary school, but suffice it to say I have a lot of experience. But most of my recent experience in the last 25 years has been working in the pharmaceutical industry in the area of regulatory affairs, so I am well versed in the sorts of things that you are discussing tonight, including and not accepting environmental assessments, because as part of new drug applications, we do that extensively, not looking at specifically the things you are talking about, but very analogously. So, what I find interesting about the data that's been presented so far, and this is more a comment than, and perhaps a criticism, I understand that you are looking at lighting and things like that relative to biological habitats. And I respect certainly that technology is fascinating relative to how you preserve lighting and the need to preserve habitats. However, but what I find really interesting is that there has been no discussion about behavioral impacts on these biologic situations. And I'm not going to tell you that behavioral studies are easy to do. They're ridiculous, and they're hard and very complicated. But to just look at the physical and biologic parameters relative to a habitat is really limiting what we're trying to say here. We're looking at how the animals, fish included there, really are able to do what they do to survive. And I don't see a discussion or have not heard a discussion relative to that aspect of it. And so any discussion about biology without an understanding or a discussion of the behavior of the various creatures that live in these habitats, I think, is really limited. And I think that's a real gap in terms of the information that I've heard to date. Thanks.
Thank you. Anyone else? A minute to about 3 minutes. Please step forward.
Good evening. I'm Chris Hart from 223 Mariposa Street in Brisbane. I'm also, in addition to being a Brisbane resident, I'm very seriously involved in railroad preservation and history, and I was very fortunate to be able to be involved in helping start off the nomination process for the Roundhouse. And coming here tonight, I'm very happy with what I've heard so far. The recommendations from the staff and from the EIR consultant. Seems like that a lot of the work that I dreamt would be done is being done. I just wanted to note a couple of things. I submitted 5 comments to the draft environmental impact report, and I got about 10 different answers, but they don't really seem to line up. I think the one thing that I did not see addressed was vibration effects to the Roundhouse and during the process of a building out there. I think it needs to be monitored carefully if there's going to be any kind of pile driving or heavy equipment motion around there, especially before it's completely stabilized. The other things I wanted to talk to were the historical integrity of the tank and boiler shop, the Lazari fuel building. When it came time to put the roundhouse on the register, I made a conscious decision that focusing on the roundhouse was the appropriate thing to do, because at the time I didn't want to disturb any existing business or employees at the Lazari fuel company. So I kind of made that decision myself, and I'm not sure how the CEQA has not recognize that building as being really significant. I think it's more significant than it's giving credit for. The inside the building is relatively unchanged since the railroad pulled out. The current tenant, Lazari Fuel Building, was renting from that from the Southern Pacific Railroad back in the 60s. So inside it really has a kind of patina and a feel that is really unique, more so than the roundhouse, which has been open to the environment and vandalism. The roundhouse also includes a turntable pit, which is part of the integral importance of the roundhouse, how it worked, how engines were turned. And then lastly, the one thing that concerns me, and it has been brought up, that is the view shed, if you will, of the roundhouse. It's probably about 400 feet wide if you look at the back side of it, and so the 50-foot setback that's recommended in the plan doesn't really seem adequate to allow you to see that.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Are you speaking of the roundhouse or the Lazari building?
I'm sorry, I'm talking about back over to the roundhouse.
Oh, okay.
Thank you. Being
So
about 400 feet
Okay.
wide, and when I see in the executive summary a road going around it, it really just kind of chills me. So. Thank you, Commissioners, for spending all your time working on this, and to the staff for doing such good work on this important historic artifact.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anya Miller, longtime Brisbane resident. I have a couple comments. One dealing with the master response 2.4.9 on the variability of wetlands, of which we've heard a lot. It does say that the Clean Water Act 404 recognizes that the wetland features are dynamic. So the DER then used the average of 20 years, as we heard, of aerial photographs to evaluate the future. And the habitat mapping that happened on site was twice in 2007, once in 2011, and once in 2013. But the scientifically proven expectation of more extreme storms and sea level rise due to climate change, these projections may not be sufficient. And this year, we are expecting unusually heavy El Niño rains. And they may indeed result in very different wetland landscape in the Baylands. And I think before you certify the EIR, that you really should call for a study this year as the rains come, if they do, for hopefully they do, that there is some sort of this rainy season figures somewhere recorded, for use when you start making the land use decisions, and including the wetlands. I know it's not in this one, but you can call for other studies, I understand. The other thing has to do with the bird kill prediction. I just heard. The renewable energy alternative was specifically designed to use a low wind turbines, not the high ones. So there's no point at all in even talking about the big major wind turbines that are birth killers. All our information is that the low-rise windmills that we propose into that Candlestick wind tunnel would not be dangerous to birds. And if indeed there is data that proves that they are, I'd very much like to see that, if possible. If you could, Madam Chair, direct staff to provide the study that shows that low-rise wind turbines are bird killers. Thank you.
Thank you.
Tony Varios, Brisbane resident, and also a member of SF Train's Board of Directors, which Chris Hart is the president of. I was happy to hear Mr. Zola mention that regardless of the commission or city council's decisions, the roundhouse should be stabilized. I'm not a scientist, I'm not an archaeologist, and I'm not an expert, but I don't think you need to be any of those things to understand basic preservation. If the city of Brisbane had valued the roundhouse and the train yard operations, the tank and boiler buildings back in the 60s, then they wouldn't be in the situation they're in now. They wouldn't be in the state that they're in now. But at that time, we know things were different. Brisbane wasn't even an incorporated city at that time. So we understand why things developed the way they did to a certain extent. But over time, Brisbane had other priorities. And that was obviously a very, very low one. So it was a neglected area. And the majority of the damages that have occurred over the past 40 or more years are due to vandalism and a lack of any attempt to protect that property until some years ago a fence was put up around it, which is a very minimal measure of protection that it has now. In our discussions about what to do in the future after seeing UPC's proposed plans for the roundhouse and its adjacent specific area, including the tank and boiler building, it is clear that their plan is exactly the opposite of what Mr. Zola was talking about this evening, where he said that the building should be the buildings around it, or whatever is developed around it, should not diminish its stature or completely obscure it. I think that hopefully is a fair description of what he was saying. And to that extent, we think that the UPC's current plan is, in a word, just outrageous, because the buildings that you could see, you've all seen the brochures that they had, the buildings that they have as artists' depictions of what they would like to see there would do exactly the opposite. They would be dwarfing the buildings that are there now. And any of you who've been out there and seen the tank and boiler building know it's a very large building. It may only be technically 1 story tall, but its height limit is more like a 4 or 5 story building at its peak. And then to have a building that's 3 or 4 stories taller than that, that's a pretty substantial building. And I don't like anything about those plans. I especially don't like the idea of having a big circular road around it like you might see in a nice European city. That would completely eliminate the possibility of the roundhouse ever being used again for its original purpose. And our organization, SF Trains, would has a dream to turn it back into a roundhouse, to actually have an operating steam locomotive in there, housed there as a museum. There would be a working museum, in addition, hopefully in conjunction with everything else you would see in a high quality, top quality teaching educational museum. So it would have both working section, static displays, as well as a gift shop and maybe a huge restaurant and some other parts to it that would cause it to be self-sustaining in terms of economy, so that you could use the profits from these other operations, retail operations, that tourists would come in and see it and pay things, and then that would sustain the museum and allow the locomotive to operate. Now, that is a dream at this point. We're working on putting together a professional business plan and a professional presentation so that it could be brought to the city and to UPC and not be on a napkin. Okay? So we understand the difference between dreams and reality, and it's a very difficult thing to accomplish. We're talking about a project that could maybe be $10 million or more, and it has no hope of ever happening unless UPC is able to make the money that they need to make some other way. So we're hoping to plant that seed in your mind as you consider the land use, because Mr. Zola said your purview is going to be all about land use and zoning. And that's critical to us. If we can't have a track in and out of there, then we have a train to nowhere. So hopefully I haven't taken too much of your time, but appreciate you thinking about these things. And when you look at that tank and boiler building, give a thought to the thousands of people who worked there, the hundreds of people who lived in Brisbane, and that was their primary place of business. Some of them who even lived right there on site in buildings that are no longer there, but we have pictures of the buildings and you can all see them. If you want to come over to my office, we've got them on display. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry.
My name is Richard Brandy, and I live in San Francisco. I'm an architectural historian, and I worked with Chris Hart to write the nomination to get the Roundhouse on the National Register. And I did so because I think it's an important historical building, and I guess there's no dispute about that. And even though I live in San Francisco, I have a sort of a personal interest in the Roundhouse. My grandfather worked for the SP. He was a boilermaker, so he must have worked in the tank house at some point, now that I think about it. Of course, I didn't ask him at the time where he actually worked. And we had a ranch that was located on McDonald Avenue, so most of that was it wasn't Brisbane then, it was 1883 to 1929, so I have sort of roots there, and I think it's important. And I won't repeat what some of the other speakers said. I support the other comments concerning the cultural resources section, and I was glad to read about mitigation 4D1A, which requires a plan and implementation of a rehabilitation plan for the Roundhouse. And I want to make sure that that includes the turntable, or the turntable base. It's right in front of it, because it's very important. You have a semicircular building with the circular pit, which had the turntable where the engines would be turned around and moved into their stalls. So both those should be an integral part of the resource. And it's not clear. I can't remember when we wrote the nomination. I think that it is part of the nomination as well. So those need to be considered as together. And then mitigation 4D1B talks about that whatever development goes around these resources is appropriate in terms of setback, scale, heights, and whatnot. And I'm not sure if it's in the EIR, but any of those development plans that are anywhere near the historic resources should meet the Secretary of Interior standards for rehabilitation, because if they do, it's a mitigation under CEQA. That means that there's no adverse impact. But the Secretary guidelines can also be used for design guidelines as well. And so I would urge your consideration of to require that standard or those standards be met in the case of any development going around the Roundhouse. And I'm also here if you have any questions about the nomination or the history, I'd be happy to answer. Thank you.
Thank you. Any more 1 to 3 minutes? Please step forward. Did you fill out one of these?
I forgot. I'll do it.
You did? Okay.
Tatiana Pomerantseva, long-time resident in Brisbane.
I'm sorry, which I don't have your card.
I'll give you because it's with me.
Oh, okay.
You just say your name again.
Yeah, because
Tatiana Pomerantseva.
It's hard to take notes without the
long-time resident in Brisbane. Okay. Many years ago, I bought a house in Brisbane because it looks like Italian city, and I really like to be here. But Lagoon, it really looks ugly. for my opinion. And nobody walking around the lagoons. Nobody spends their time around the lagoon. And in European city, in San Francisco, people trying to adjust ecology with people and bring beauty to that places. And right now, I don't see any changes in lagoon. It will be stay like right now, ugly, and nobody will spend their time near the lagoon. I think we should think about this space and do it more beautiful. Because it really could be beautiful. I have seen so many spaces much worse in Europe, and which after a couple years, with help of society, get very, very beautiful. We have such beautiful city, and we need to think about this one, I think, about lagoons.
Thank you. Okay. Anyone else within that kind of time?
Colleen Mackin, very short. There's been a lot of mention in the FEIR about archaeological artifacts in the cultural resources section. The site's a former repository of fill, contains cultural remnants from the 1870s to debris from the 2006 earthquake. I'd like to see some consideration given to careful extraction, maybe identification, preservation of items. These are really unique relics of our Bay Area history. Thank you.
Thank you.
I was under the impression that you would take first comments on the biology and then separately on the cultural resources.
Right, but I was actually taking notes as we were going, but it seems to be a mix.
Okay.
And
now,
so I think
can
there were
fin-
people.
Then can I talk about cultural resources at
Absolutely.
this time? I
Let
didn't
me add
before.
to your, yes, sure.
I have a comment on our Brisbane Citizens Committee comment number 6 on native artifacts. Actually, it's a response. And a response says, since 1906, the area now known as Brisbane Baylands was within San Francisco Bay. Thus, there's no potential for locating native artifacts or culturally significant areas within the project site. I just found a recent report from the San Francisco Public Utilities Commission when they said, when construction work happens in San Francisco, traces of the city's history are often uncovered. During a recent Visitation Valley project to upgrade old sections of the Sunnyvale neighborhood sewer lines, archaeologists found 2 ships, a scow schooner and a barge. The ships, more than 100 years old when found, were buried 15 feet below ground. That 15 feet below ground in a neighborhood adjacent to the Baylands is a clear indication that similar archaeological items may well be buried under the bay fill there. There could have been ships. Instead, the off-the-cuff assumptions of potential cultural resources or lack thereof, a real scientific examination of a site should be conducted before the EIR is certified. And on the roundhouse, I remember talking to Chris actually some time ago about the spurs, the railroad spurs that are being destroyed as fast as we go. That if you are going to potentially have the roundhouse actually working and having a locomotive there, you have to bring the locomotive there somehow. And there really should be a spur track then from the main line to the roundhouse. That would really make it a functional facility with the train actually coming on track to the site and really enhance it. So I just wanted to hope, Chris, you still think about that. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Anybody else have 3 minutes? No? Okay. I don't know how long it'll take. Okay.
I'd like to echo Anya Miller's concern about.
Sorry, could you have your name? State your name for the record.
I'm sorry. Clara Johnson, 159 Lake Street. I'd like to echo Anya Miller's concern about both ships being somewhere in that film, or also native artifacts. I'd like to go through one by one. In the cultural resources section, in 4D1A, that's a mitigation measure number. In line 8, the wording should be changed from may to must. In 4D1A, the requirement for a roundhouse rehabilitation plan should be changed to say that, or the submission of that plan should be changed so that it would occur sooner. I think that the complete plan should be required to be done within 1 year after the approval of the specific plan. That is in capital letters, the overall plan being discussed now. The actual rehabilitation should occur within 2.5 years after the approval of any specific plan. This way, the roundhouse and its rehabilitation would be a touchstone. It would be a reference to the past that guides the way forward. A bond should be required of the developer to assure that the rehabilitation actually takes place. For mitigation measure 4D1B, the architectural compatibility standard distance should be increased. The 50 feet included in mitigation measure 4D1B could be construed to mean from the historic roundhouse building. And if there were a 10-foot sidewalk on either side of a street, which is 40 feet wide, then you really could have buildings sitting right on the street, across the street from it, from the building. I think it should be increased so that it's 150 feet in all directions from the edge of the green space surrounding the historic roundhouse. The architectural compatibility area or zone should extend out 150 feet in all directions from the edge of sidewalks or paths for the machine equipment building. This is mitigation 4D2. If the recommendations of the consulting archaeologists differ from the city's determination, then it says that the city's determination will be final if there is a difference. Then the city should provide a justification of its determination using archaeological standard practices to explain why their determination was made. The Cultural Resources Management Plan should be peer-reviewed by a qualified independent archaeologist before it is approved and put into practice. Independent means an archaeologist with no financial or other connection to the developer, the city, the employees of the developer or the city, or ESA. 4D2. It isn't clear how the grading or construction contractor will know how to identify the archaeological or prehistoric items described in CEQA Guidelines Section 15064.5. That should be reviewed by a consulting archaeologist. I think it's very important to realize when my husband was a general building contractor, and I've had a lot of experience being around him, and I know that you're a general building contractor yourself. When people go out to build, they go to build. They're not concerned with anyone else's goals, only their own, because they have deadlines. Sometimes they have incentive to finish quickly. So if you're going to require them to do something, you really need to be very specific. You need standards. You need accountability. And if you don't call for it specifically, you're not going to get it, because people have a particular purpose why they're there. On paper and in this room, it sounds one way. Out on a site, it is completely a different situation, chaotic, and people revert to what they need to do. Since this measure states that the city, that the city will make the final determination to the appropriate avoidance measures or other appropriate mitigation, it should also include the consultant archaeologist's written opinion as to what should be done as appropriate avoidant measures, and I think we'll let the "and" stand. Appropriate avoidance measures. These are biological resources now. This is from the master response on page 2.4.21. Since 2010 is the base year and a lot more soil has been placed on the land, the result will be that larger amounts of soil will need to be moved by construction equipment or truck, and that activity will result in more noise, more air pollution, more dust, more oil leaking onto the soil. It creates a greater impact. In the mitigation monitoring matrix, mitigation measure 4.C1A, I have a concern that biological resources are reduced to only the special status species or candidates or sensitive. Only that seems to be what we're almost entirely concerned with. And not the rest of the natural world, the plants and animals appear to be irrelevant under CEQA. That's hype a little bit, but for the most part I believe it seems to be true. It appears that the idea is to decimate the plant and land populations until they have become special status species. Let's not let them do that. Ice house hill surveys should be done before any earth-moving work begins within 500 or 1,000 feet of the hill. I read in the report that there wouldn't be any development work done, but it isn't really very clear where they're talking about. So I would just say that there has to be a distance, because the dust and noise may discourage the threatened species from being in that location, and thereby make any survey inaccurate. Mitigation measure 4C1B. The buffer zone should be 100 feet on Ice House Hill, a distance that allows for a margin of error. Measure 4C1F. The requirement for pre-construction and post-construction survey monitoring of bat turbine interaction should not apply to a PV panel solar facility. It is a way to make a solar facility less feasible by unnecessarily occurring cost to do such a study, because avian species and solar panels are not going to interact. They may have been thinking of a solar concentrating facility, which is not planned there. 4C1G, there should be a review of the stormwater permit to be sure that the standards required reflect the toxic contaminants found in the soil. We've had Dr. Lee assert that the proper stormwater practices should not be the ones that are in place there. Our city engineer has said that that is what is in the county's permit, of which Brisbane is a part. So the county and Dr. Lee, who has written clean water standards, disagree on that point, and I don't think it's been resolved, and it's certainly not resolved in the EIR. Mitigation measure 4C1G, the area of increased impervious surface will be in the hundreds of acres under these alternatives. And who will decide what is enough to offset the stormwater amounts caused by this increase? It is laudable and necessary to decree that no fertilizers or pesticides will be used, but how will that prohibition be enforced and monitored after construction? During construction, it's supposed to be enforced by the city engineer, but the majority of life will occur after the construction, even if it takes 20 years. All statements of compliance with mitigation measures and conditions should require a written assertion that the person who is saying, I have done something, I have checked this out, it needs to be a written assertion where the mitigation is named, and it should also show the signature, title, employer, date, time of this report. All such statements should be stored and retrievable and not subject to any changes. Mitigation 4C1G. The lagoon perimeter area maintenance needs to have standards for timely replacement of type, number, size of plants. And the word appropriate, when they're talking about where to put trash containers, needs to be defined. Every time you say appropriate for what purpose? It doesn't, you have to say what it is that you're thinking of as a goal in order to understand what it means. Mitigation 4C1G, a funding mechanism is needed in order to pay for the items around the lagoon, and for that matter, for almost every other place. I think a Melrose district would be a good method. There are other methods mentioned here, but that should be considered. A Melrose district for safety and hazards. There should be a higher, this is under still mitigation 4C1G, there should be a higher frequency of monitoring water and vegetation. Mitigation measure 4C2A, strict enforcement is needed in order, and I'd like to know how they intend to achieve that. Will there be more standards? Will the frequency and accountability be called out on the sensitive biocommunities and the wetlands? Fencing to avoid unintended impacts on wetlands. The standards of education of the construction worker and its frequency of how it will be conducted and monitored needs to be described. Who will provide oversight on the limits and the procurement of permits for work in the vicinity of the lagoon's perimeter and the sensitive biocommunities and restored wetlands that occur there. All replacement or loss of sensitive natural communities should occur on-site, not off-site, as has been suggested. This is an area that is a naturally...
I'm sorry, could you say that again?
Mm-hmm. I said that all of the replacement of loss of sensitive natural communities should occur on-site rather than off-site. This is a natural place to do that, and it's needed here, so why would it be done off-site? It would be a way to avoid doing it on-site. So it should be not allowed. In the mitigation plan, it mentions that it could be off-site, meaning not on the baylands, somewhere else, entirely in a different place.
Mm-hmm.
Just to mention that the wetlands provide they filter contaminants, provide flood control, and provide habitat. And the flood control, of course, would relate to sea level rise, among other conditions. Mitigation measure 4C2A. I think there's although there is some acknowledgement of sea level rise, I don't believe that it's dealt with hardly at all. On the BBCAG, we've noted that by the tank farm, sometimes the groundwater, is at 6 inches below surface. And there is a tidal, at least down in Dilworth, and I think there's tidal action there, because it goes up and down. And if it's 6 inches below and you have sea level rise up to 3 feet, then, what will that mean in that area surrounding the tank farm? Mitigation measure 4C4A. The phrase, wherever possible, needs an explanation. What constraints are referred to? Is it money, physical impossibility, time? There should be minimum standards. And there's a discussion of nest boxes, I believe, for burrowing owls. And you need to know what you're going to do. There should be standards for placement. How many? When will they place these in that position? Will it be in time to save lives of the animals, or will it be on a schedule that's 2 years too late? The primary mention of non-avian wildlife is discussing how to kill it. Rodents, for example, feral animals, which might be called wildlife, unless you specifically say that you're talking about formerly domestic animals. I know they don't intend to use pesticide, but the traps might also be something that traps for the rodents could harm sensitive biocommunities if they were placed there in order to control them. Habitat areas and fences. Fencing is a barrier to wildlife as well as formerly domestic animals. There should be standards to protect wildlife regarding fences and rodent control. 4C. I mentioned that feral animals could also be a word to describe wildlife. It would be good to clarify that.
I'm sorry. Are you suggesting that when we look at this that we should require to make certain that the fencing is...
That you consider, when you're building fencing, consider what does that fencing do to the wildlife?
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Yeah, because the intent is to control feral animals, but the wildlife might also be controlled in a way that isn't consistent with their long-term survival.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. 4C, 4D. The building height requirement consultation should be 50 feet. This is concerning bird strikes, because birds are likely to be found at heights much less than 100 feet. And since they're hitting the windows in my house occasionally, and that's not that many, about probably 15 or 20 feet off the ground. So I think it's worthwhile to do it at a lower height. Mitigation 4C, 4E, the building the building height requiring a consultant should be, this is also, there's two issues about birds. And I think the height should be lowered for both of them to 50 feet. And that is 4C, 4E, and 4C, 4D. The design should provide wildlife corridors. The layout of the project should provide wildlife corridors with sufficient width and native plants with a non-hardscape surface. The plan could also serve for human passage, and it should allow for both upland bay and travel, and also for there's a southerly passage through the baylands. I want to make a comment on contiguous open space. I think that's a good idea. You're not sure what an island environment, how big does it have to be to sustain life? That's the whole question with the San Bruno Mountain Habitat Conservation Plan. But I think it also needs to be, Mr. Zalan mentioned that it would be a patchwork, and I think that's very important too. I think there needs to be more open space than is planned for in these alternatives. And I just wanted to make one more comment about the need for information. You can't do an analysis if you don't have enough information to make the analysis meaningful, so that you can describe impacts. And I have some difficulty with the whole idea that how specific the information is. It needs to be specific enough so you can calculate what the impacts might be. And I feel it seems disingenuous to me to pretend that you don't need that much information. And I read many of the comments, and a number of other people seem to agree on that issue. I think that's about it. And I thank you very much for your patience and your attention. And I look forward to seeing you at future meetings of this kind. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Your comments are rather detailed. Do you think you could submit them in writing?
I will. I will type them up on the computer and send them to your staff.
Appreciate
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there a recording available for this?
Are we going to have any written information from these meetings, or is it going to just be televised?
No, there'll be minutes from all these. There will be not just summary minutes. There'll be there won't be a transcript, but there'll be minutes that summarizes all the comments that were made. And after the public hearing for tonight, we can talk about what the expectation is for how you want staff to sort of respond back to and how you get this information in written form that you can digest it.
Right. Oh, that's fantastic. Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else?
Hi, my name is Prem Lal, Brisbane resident as well, and this will not be as detailed, but I think it's important to bring to the Commission, because I don't really see a whole lot of conversation about this topic, and I'm not really sure it's being taken into consideration as importantly as it should be.
Sorry, could you clarify, is this the biological or the cultural?
It is biological and ecological. And that is the concept of this high-speed rail project that could potentially affect the Brisbane Baylands. It has its advocates and it has its critics. I personally can't say one way or the other because I don't have enough information presented to me from either this project, this EIR, or anywhere else. But I do think that it is important enough that it should be addressed considerably more than it has been in the draft environmental impact report. And I've brought with me a letter from the office of the mayor of San Francisco, Edwin Lee. And this was addressed to you, Mr. Swecki. I don't really know where it ended up and who actually got to see this, but it has it's about 21 pages in length with a letter and a bunch of attachments. And I'm just going to mention to you two paragraphs. The first paragraph is...
When was the letter written?
This was written January 21st, 2014. The first paragraph is kind of boilerplate, but the second paragraph, especially the first sentence, I find a little bit concerning. So the first paragraph says, San Francisco appreciates acknowledgement in the Baylands Draft Environmental Impact Report that the California High-Speed Rail Authority has identified the Baylands as the recommended location for an approximately 100-acre high-speed rail terminal storage and maintenance facility, as the high-speed rail service will be a blended service with facilities jointly used by California High-Speed Rail and Caltrain, and then in parentheses, Bay Area to Central Valley High-Speed Rail Environmental Impact Report, Supplemental Alternatives Analysis, 2010. We suggest a more in-depth analysis of the implications of the Baylands proposal upon the California High-Speed Rail Authority project. We suggest that you combine the future storage facility with the renewable energy alternative already analyzed in the draft Environmental Impact Report, Chapter 5, into a new variant on that alternative. All right, so that was the first paragraph. This is the second paragraph, the first sentence of which bothers me. We disagree with the statement in the draft Environmental Impact Report that the California High-Speed Rail Authority project is premature and speculative. So I want to know where they got that idea. And then the rest of it is construction contracts for the first 29 miles of rail have already been signed, and requests for qualifications for construction of the next 60-mile segment of rail have been released by the California High-Speed Rail Authority. Summary of requirements for operators and maintenance facilities for that project has also been prepared in April of 2013. That document identifies the need for and conceptual design of an approximately 100-acre rail yard facility in the vicinity of San Francisco. The Baylands was the recommended location for such a rail yard in the California High-Speed Rail Authority Environmental Impact Report. So I'm going to submit this letter to everyone so that everyone can read the full 2 pages.
Through the chair, that's part of the final EIR. It's, Lloyd, and if you want to give them the reference. You can provide it, but it is part of the final EIR.
Because, I mean, I got this from the Brisbane website, but I just want to make sure, because there's been some discussion about how people on the Planning Commission and City Council were unaware of that, and that just, to me, doesn't make any sense. So I want to make sure that this is really taken into consideration as it is. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you for the reminder that it's actually in the FEIR as well as it's online.
Hello.
Hi.
My name is Michael Schumann. I want to thank you all for the beginning of what's going to be a lot of hard work here. Just a brief comment. I was happy to hear in the staff report and about the recommendation to consolidate the open space to the south and consolidate the development to the north. I mean, one, it just makes a lot of sense from the standpoint of biological resources and having that open space together. But sort of it also, for me, it jives with something that I find important. When I look out from my house from Brisbane, I really like having that sense of a buffer between Brisbane and the big city to the north. And so, you know, when I think about this development, I've always thought that it would be important to have also that buffer of that sense of where Brisbane is and where the development is. So I just wanted to sort of echo the many purposes that I believe those suggestions will serve. Thanks.
Thank you.
Jamie Dunn, Brisbane resident for 26 years. I'm very concerned about this letter. I feel that I've missed it somehow, and I'm wondering, by looking at your faces, if you missed it or you've had it in front of you all this time, and I'm wondering why it wasn't a most prominent piece of the draft EIR that we studied. I think that should have been such a clarion call to us to take a good look at what we're doing. We put all this effort into this EIR, and here we have this project that is on its way. And it seems to me that there seems to be a rush to get this thing done, to get this entitlement done for the development, for the developer. I'm wondering why. Who benefits from this? Does the city? Not us. I don't think we'll benefit from it. Who will benefit from this rush to get this done? I'm very concerned about this letter. I'd like to see this letter put online so that regular citizens in the community who may not be attending these meetings will see that the City of San Francisco, the mayor of the City of San Francisco, sent a very detailed letter over a year and a half ago regarding this issue, and it has not been made a big deal here, and it should be a big deal. It's a very big deal. It sort of obliterates a lot of this other stuff that's going on out in the Baylands. We have all this work that we're doing about, you know, the jot and tittle of every single thing that we could possibly consider for the Baylands, and they're talking about a 100-acre facility that they need that's going to take up half of it. Look at all the staff time. Look at all the money. Look at all the efforts of all the people in the community that have been put into this. I don't get it. I don't understand it. How did this happen? How did it happen? Did you all have that letter and you were all looking at it, but the rest of us we're just getting some little hint of it. Maybe somewhere if we poured through tons of documents, we might have found it, we might have understood it. But 100 acres. And this is a letter from the mayor of the city of San Francisco. This is a very prominent person, a very prominent letter. A lot of work's been done by that city. They've got 29, as he said, 29 miles of this is done already? What are we talking about? Why are we going through all of this work? Piece by piece by piece, all of the citizens of the city of Brisbane. We don't have anything else to do? Like the staff, they're getting paid. They don't have anything else to do? You don't have anything else to do? What the heck's going on here? I'm flummoxed by this. I want to see that letter online for every citizen in Brisbane to take a look at it, that this letter was here, and it was here a year and a half ago, a year and 3/4 almost. And this is not the most prominent piece that we are considering when we talk about the Bay Lanes. I'm in amazement. I'm looking at all of you and I'm wondering what the heck's going on here. Who should have told us? Who should have told us? I want to know. Should the city have told us? Should they have told you? Shouldn't we know, all of us? Shouldn't every one of us in this city know that there's a plan for that already?
Again, as a reminder, it's actually in the FEIR.
It may be in the FEIR, but
and
you know
it's
how many,
online.
You know how many people, look.
Actually, currently online.
You know, we've talked about one other thing before. There's a really serious discrimination that goes on in this city. And we discriminate against people who do not read the pieces on the computer. Some people can't. Some people don't have a computer. Some people can't get the internet. But we do have a television. And we do not use Channel 27. And these kinds of things should be running on there all the time because anybody, almost anybody in town, can take a look at it. We post something online and we say, why don't people read it? First of all, I have a hard time reading these tiny little print that you see. So, and I think there's a heavy discrimination against people who are not using the computer for one reason or another. They either can't afford one, they can't afford the internet, they can't afford the time to read it in these tiny little things. I have to use a magnifying glass to look at it. So I'm really very concerned about this, and I'm wanting to get some consolation from you that, in fact, you're on top of this, and you knew this all along, and if you did, why didn't we?
Thank you. Actually, could we withhold that? We have 2 people who are still waiting. Could we hold that because we agreed that we're going to try to cycle everybody in? Thank you. So we have Shannon and we have Dana.
Dana Dilworth, Brisbane resident, 20-something years. I wanted to respond to some things that were said at the last meeting initially, and then to the mitigation monitoring program. A lot of things have been said, so I'm going to try to keep it to a minimum, but
would we be addressing the biological?
Biological only so far. I appreciate that Mr. Zola had said that you as a body need to act in the public interest, and that he mentioned that you actually had the option of not approving the project, but it wasn't quite as flushed out to say that you also have the option of not approving the draft EIR or considering it insufficient. And already we have enough reasons to say that this draft EIR is insufficient. One thing that wasn't mentioned is that the community as a whole has not sat down and read through the specific plan. When the specific plan was made available to the public, it was in executive summary form. And then we reviewed it and responded to some draft EIR, but the public, you guys, the City Council, has not reviewed the language in the specific plan. And therefore, us all working on the draft EIR is us interpreting somebody else's impression of the impacts for the draft, for the proposed specific plan. And I also wanted to mention that our general plan is the guiding document, and I do not understand why there was some kind of like mistake or continued mention about the 1980 general plan. That was what was sued. The city was sued as having inadequate 1980 general plan. That's not a guiding document. It's the 1994 general plan. I did want to say that the document is incorrect because there is tidal influence all the way to west of Bayshore. The PG&E marsh is tidally influenced. It has saline water, and that is part of some earlier reports. So there is connectivity from basically Cow Palace to the bay through the, it actually kind of S-curves. Some of it's underground. I just have a list of reasons why this is not sufficient document. That 4C1A only mentions Ice House Hill, and as has been said, only mentions basically invertebrates, doesn't take into account frogs and other animals, other species that exist, live, have naturalized on the baylands, and there are a number of reports in earlier iterations of the specific plans from Dominique Massour and very well-qualified biologists that happened to be out there when things were very fruitful, not in 2010 after the water board required them to drain the wetlands. So you have, that is the problem with us accepting 2010 as the baseline, because it comes after an order to drain the wetlands out there. The 4C1B only mentions status plant of Viola paniculata. There are other status plants, and there should be other, I mean, lupin would be one, but other plants considered for a greater range of species than just the endangered butterflies. 4C1C only speaks to trail-related construction. There's potentially a number of kinds of construction that could occur on Ice House Hill or near it, and partly there is a, it's not a cell phone tower, but it's a relay station up there, and so there is no mention of the potential of any impacts that could happen on Ice House Hill for anything other than a trail construction. That's a little myopic. So that's inadequate. About doing boxes for birds, you reconstruct boxes for the returning animals. Will they return? Is there... all this mentions is a minimal coverage of one-to-one loss of habitat. That is outrageous, and I will keep my outrage to myself. Actually, there's some typos on 4-21 because I don't think we have leeches on our animals, off-leash pets. And a final report of FF pre-construction surveys. Anyway, we've been asking for a comprehensive biological study that looks at everything, not that just sets 45 days prior to site grading of having somebody run out and go, oh, I don't see anything, because, you know, if you look at what's happening just on the project on San Bruno and Williams, that every day they have trucks going over the land. They have, they started a cut, now they're moving over. So it's really insufficient to have a limited survey prior to grading, because we need to know all the animals that are out there. I know there are bats there because when I've been photographing at the PG&E Marsh, the bats come down, get the things, and then they fly back to, and I believe it's Ice House, or the Roundhouse. And I know you have these generic provisions, but what about improving the habitat rather than just not disturbing them when it happens? So I would recommend bat houses and other environment improving things than just to deal with a one-time impact. I have and will continue to state concerns over having the community development director or non-qualified biologist people making decisions, and that's the mitigation measure of 4C2A, and was concerned that there's no mention of tidal gates, because in terms of impacts, tide gates are considered. It may be a sea level rise mitigation, not even mentioned. Inadequate. What can we say? Some of the language, it actually doesn't say what do you do if things aren't don't function or aren't the outcome that you expect. And I would go back to Clara's remarks that we need a bonding program. We need some insurance that some of this is going to happen. We had the experience on the Northeast Ridge that some mitigation for the frog habitat was going to take place, and it's been zero, and it's been zero, it's been zero, it's been zero. And so we need to protect ourselves from that. There should be some indication of allowing access, because one of the problems that they're having right now at VWR is that Caltrains isn't going to, or I don't know if this is still currently the situation, but they were having issues of getting access in order to do studies, and it just shouldn't be.
I'm sorry, where are you speaking of?
For VWR, they were having problems getting access to study, and when I was working with the water board, a different board than the current one, I think his name was Doug Straw, had told me that that if you're acting in the public's interest, you should have access to the public resources. And that was specifically about having access to the waterways in order to monitor them. And so there's kind of general monitoring and reporting, but it should allow a public access for observation or some type of peer review or something whereby these decisions go before a larger board than a paid consultant and a city employee. And I'm not, no offense intended, I just think that it's a bigger world and more eyes give a better outcome. There in biological resources, 4C, 4A, something about, first of all, it goes, an education program for residents. don't know, shall be developed and posted in interpretive signs. But it says such restrictions will be monitored by Property Owners Association. There's no other place where it requires property owner associations, and yet they are going to be the people doing a mitigation measure. I think that that would be an inadequate provision. The other thing is that Mr. Zola had said that mitigation measures could be to reduce impacts, but then there are some mitigation measures that we just can't reduce, and I totally disagree. The reason are that the issues with lighting, mitigation measure for that is lights out at night, period. And if you know, find uses that don't require 24/7 lighting. Marsh protection plan seems a little specious without more information. And there's a no pets policy only for construction workers, not, you know, employees or, you know, and actually I'm a dog sitter, so, you know, there could be, you know, dog issues out there. I think that you should have greater standards or set some standards for the mitigation corridors. And one of the issues that had been raised is what do you do about going over the rail lines? And I think that if we don't stand here and state that it's required that we go above, over the rails, we are going to get at crossing, and I believe that's what I saw quite a bit in the transportation section. And so I also think that the lagoon is not part of the Baylands. It is a different designation. They have been including the square footage of the lagoon as part of open space, and I think you got to be clear that we're not going to fill out every inch of 900 acres and only end up with a lagoon. I think we need to be very clear about how much open space we want, rather than kind of like at the very end, kind of move it all around and hope something falls into place. We need to be very strong about what it is that needs to be done out there. And I would hope that you either improve this, I don't know, draft EIR, or deny it as being inadequate. Thank you.
Thank you. Shannon?
Hi, my name is Shannon Davis. I'm a Brisbane resident and an environmental scientist. Just 3 brief comments this evening. First, I want to support the archaeological comments made both by Colleen and Anya earlier this evening. And several folks have spoken to wanting to have all the species considered and not just the endangered species, and I would support that as well. And last, the issue that was brought up about Mayor Lee's letter, I believe it was in January 2014, about the impending high-speed rail possibility. It seems really prudent that, even though it's in the final EIR, that somehow, as citizens and the public, we're given some sort of overlay where there's a crosswalk between how those decisions on high-speed rail occur and when they occur, and if they decide that they want to use this land in the Baylands, is that an eminent domain issue? Is it, if they want it, can they take it? So just some way to understand on a timeline what happens and how it happens, so that we can give comment to that. And thank you very much for your time and your effort up there.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Anya. Could you please come up and appreciate it?
Sorry, I just wanted to answer Jamie while she was here because she was so concerned. And her question was, what happened? Why don't you know about the high-speed rail? And I have some history of that because when the Krebel first proposed the renewable energy alternative as an alternative to be studied in the EIR, Council, particularly Councilman Conway, absolutely said, if you put in high-speed rail in that plan, we're not going to include it as an alternative. So in order to get the alternative included in the study, and as it's now been stated, it's most environmentally superior, we took out any mention of the high-speed rail. We knew at that time already, and this was back in maybe 2009 or something. We took it out in order to at least have the solar and the wind energy facility utility scale that we wanted to be considered equally. And actually the council then said that alternative should be studied at the same level as the scenarios. Well, it wasn't. It was just included as one of the alternatives. So that's that answer. It was known. Council knew about that. There have been council members attending meetings, but they just don't want to deal with it. They claim that it wasn't formal yet. There was no formal proposal. And so now we do have some documentation that seems to indicate it's pretty formal. And as far as the renewable energy plan and the high-speed rail are concerned, it is Krebel's understanding that it's quite possible to have the same 100 acres used for both the rail yard and solar on top. So we'd have double use of that alternative. If you call for a variant, then it would not be that complicated. We're talking about the same acreage.
I'm sorry, what do you mean by call for a variant?
Well, there was a suggestion that there be a variant of the alternative, the renewable alternative plan, which the mayor was suggesting. Yeah, that there be an overlay or
okay.
a variant.
I wasn't sure
like
what you were referring to. Thank you very much.
Yeah. And so if you do that, that's fine. Really, it would be a great way to go before you make any land use decisions. And it is an eminent domain issue. There's nothing we can do if high-speed rail wants to have that yard here for their electric trains, which will not be the same as we had before in the roundhouse and the rail yard. It would be feasible. I have some other general comments on specifically Master Response 4 on a CEQA review. There's another statement that bothers me because it's kind of sort of flippant to me. It says, consistent with CEQA's mandate, the Bayline EIR serves an informational purpose. It does not provide value judgments about what may be, quote, good or, quote, bad for Brisbane and the surrounding region. Evaluate what the community may or may not want for the future of the Baylands. So I just have a feeling that good and bad are really words that people understand. So significant, unavoidable impacts, to me, are bad. Significant, unavoidable impact, especially, or so many of them as we have, that require total change of our general plan. They are bad, and people should not be. It should not be hidden from people. These are bad things for Brisbane, and so that's all I'm saying. That these planning words, significant, unavoidable, is bad. Then, already at the draft stage, we did the Brisbane Citizens Committee. Commented, and the response BCC 407 addresses the community proposed CPP community proposed plan scenario.
As stated in a comment, only the acceptable land uses were discussed at the community meetings, not any square footage of total development. The response says that development intensity was established by unknown establishers to evaluate worst-case impacts of the scenario. So that was the reason to put in a square footage, the millions and millions. The name of community preferred or community proposed plan was not intended by the consultants to denote community acceptance or any recommendation by the community. However, that is the remaining false implication that may well have some influence in the future decision-making process. Community process. It wasn't the only truly community-developed concept plan in the EIA is the renewable energy alternative. It is purely citizen-developed. It incorporates all the open space and other land uses delineated at the community meeting. So we took all those and put them in a renewable plan. But the development would be at much less intensity in order to comply with Brisbane's current highly regarded general plan. Then I have another thing. I really have a thing about maps. They have to be accurate and correct as far as to what they are presenting. A response to the BCC 26 that has to do with figure 3.16, a map that this is quoting the response. The spur track serving the existing lumber yards is proposed to be moved to serve the lumber yards in their new location on the west side of the rail line, those type. Well, that moved spur line is not shown in figure 3.16. And I'm just saying because there's recent evidence of other outdated maps, zoning maps, being used and given to you as justification to change something. They're not consistent with general plan, but you're being misled by some of these outdated zoning maps because the zoning wasn't done consistent with the general plan. And so it's really important, at least in this EIR or whatever you consider, that you have the maps that are correct. That's my last statement, and I appreciate your time.
Thank you much.
Tony Varios, I think we're very fortunate to have our former mayors who read so well and pay attention to so much fine detail, because it really can be helpful to you in your deliberations and the city council later, as well as the city staff. Everybody, more eyes are better all the time, more ideas. And in terms of the biological resources comments that were made, I think Dana Dilworth made a good point about the water, how it travels. You don't have to be a scientist. There was one lady here who's identified herself as a biologist, and I would defer to her on the science part of it. But you don't have to be a scientist to see where water moves in Brisbane. All you have to do is know a little bit of the history to understand what a high water table we have here. It used to flood right where the community park is, all the way to the hardware store, and probably a little bit beyond that. I'm not exactly sure how far it came in. It used to have floods, and a lot of flood control work has been done, and now we don't have the floods anymore. The city, I guess it may have been Crocker Park that drained the lakes that were in what is now Crocker Park, where my office is. I'm sure my office would have been sitting right in the middle of one of them. And as we walk around there and walk the dogs, and we see what the city created as a trail that followed the old rail line going through the tunnel under Bay Shore. It connects over to the machinery equipment company area. There are ditches on both sides of that former rail line, and those ditches have water in them all the time, even down now with this drought. If you dig down, there's frogs in there. They dig down to survive. They don't need much water to survive, and they've been surviving man's onslaughts for millions and millions of years, I'm sure. And before we did anything to help them, they managed to do okay on their own. Same with the butterflies. Now, I'm not minimizing the need to pay attention to those resources and not abuse them any further. I support action being taken and planning being done that will minimize impacts up front. I don't think man is proven to be very good at rebuilding nature in general, while the state of California is doing a lot out in the Delta areas and some other places. I'm not sure all the extent of it, but I know that billions of dollars are being spent by the state and federal money to recreate wetlands and other places here in California, maybe to a greater extent than any place other than New Orleans, where they've destroyed all their barrier water protection that they used to have originally. Anyway, here we've got all this water flowing back and forth, and we have the high water table, and we have to be aware of that. I'm sure that any studies that get done, hydrologists will confirm that, geologists will confirm that, and when people start digging for foundations, they're going to find things just like Anya Miller said. They found a couple of ships in Visitation Valley that I wasn't aware of. It's not uncommon, and I'm sure we'll find a lot of surprises as construction goes forward for whatever gets approved, regardless of whether it's the high-speed rail or anything else. And when they find those resources, it's going to stop their construction, and the state and federal laws that apply will mean that experts will have to come in and do the artifact research that's normal. Standard protocols apply. So I'm not too much concerned about that. But, as UPC began to grade, they began to blade, I would call it. I don't know what the proper construction term is, but they take a bulldozer and they push the dirt from left to right, from north to south, south to north, east to west, back and forth on what used to be the former rail yard. As they did that activity, they were, I believe, aerating the soil to help some of the pollutants that are in there, which are mostly, as I understand it, most of it was petroleum-related products that got in there from the old train operations, and it helps it to degrade. That stuff all degrades naturally anyway, but it just depending on how many years it takes for it to happen and how much pollution's in the groundwater below there. Well, we know it has a high water table, so we know there's impacts there. But while they grade, they start blading around there, and then it disturbs the wildlife that's out there. And there's a lot of it out there. I could tell you all of it, but I don't need to because you're probably already aware of it. And if you're not, it's probably already in the EIR report. But the jackrabbits all started coming up by my house up on Northeast Ridge at Viewpoint. Were any of you aware of that? I didn't think so. I didn't think so. Well, there were a lot of jackrabbits, and I thought that was great because, first off, you don't get to see them except if you're hitting one on Tunnel Road. You normally wouldn't get to see one, like a squirrel that runs across the road. But they were coming up there in such numbers that we would see them in the daytime, and then you would see all these droppings, which in that case, it's free fertilizer, so it was okay. Well, now you don't see any of them anymore. And the question is, okay, fine. Well, did they just get, did their habitat, did their normal place where they came from settle down to the point where they could go back there? Or did the birds eat them all? Because birds ate some of them. There are a lot of hawks around here, more than in 2000 when I moved in. And all the people in Brisbane that were concerned about all the construction on the Northeast Ridge, destroying the butterfly habitat and screwing up the riparian bird paths and whatnot. Well, the birds figured out how to go above the houses and around the houses and make nests all over our houses. The Northeast Ridge has been a boon to Brisbane's wildlife. There's everything that grows up here and lives up here or ever did, they're all over by our house. So if you're not sure, if you want to come see some, I'll show you where they're at. Those skunks, no problem. My next door neighbor had skunks coming into their house so much we had to pour a bunch of concrete there to keep them out. And So, I'm sensitive to that thing because, to that aspect because I care about nature just like all of you do, and most of the rest of us do. And I'd like to see, one of the things that I see in a lot, prevalent in a lot of construction is they don't put a culvert under a road where any idiot, you don't have to be a biologist to understand that animals need to get across this road. And instead of having a culvert going under the road, the animals can just go through there, which would probably be their preference and their normal instinct. If there is no culvert and there's no other natural way to go, they're going to go across the road and they're going to get killed. And that's what we get on Guadalupe Canyon Parkway all the time. We get coyotes killed up there, owls, coyotes, skunks, mostly skunks. And you probably have all seen that. So I'd like to see a greater attention paid to creating a more natural type of path for the animals that's not a human trail, not a trail for us to use, but just something that they can use that will protect them to a greater extent. And then the other thing that I've seen is, for example, in San Francisco, where a huge amount of construction is going on right now, down at Mission Bay, you're all familiar with that, I'm sure. For some reason, it's the first place I've ever seen where the infrastructure went in, the sewer and the streets, that's normal, natural, but then they planted trees. And they planted trees 2 or 3 years prior to grading and putting in foundations for a building. And I thought, that's fantastic. By the time the building gets built, the trees don't look like they just came out of a box. I'm talking about a 24-inch box that a lot of trees come in from the nursery. And so it's good to see that your landscape, your major landscape investment is in and it's viable. Because when they built our house again up on the ridge, the planning department at that time, the commissioners who were on the planning commission at that time, either didn't know better or didn't have better advice. I don't know what the situation was. I know that Brookfield Homes came in and just said, well, you tell us what we want and we'll build it. Just give us the permit. We don't care. They just want to make money. So they come in with their architect's ideas, but they'll change anything around in order to get their permit and make their money. And that's what they did. Well, we wound up with $1 million or more worth of landscape up there that was incredibly badly designed. It was all designed by professionals. The city's professionals were paid by the developer. And all these professionals that worked on that project screwed it up all kinds of ways, and I'm not going to waste your time tonight telling you, but I could tell you if you want to hear about it privately. And we're stuck with that forever. We can't change it all. We can change little pieces of it, but it's in the planned unit development that the city signed over there, and we're basically stuck with a lot of problems that they created for us. Bad planning, all done by professionals. And you can just count on that because everywhere you look, you can see more examples of it. So I would hope that we would learn from some of those examples of what's been done right here in Brisbane and other places around us, and try to apply the best alternatives that are out there. And then as far as the train situation is concerned, the high-speed rail, when Joel Diaz brought it up last week, I guess it was, I was wondering why he had raised that question. And of course, we've all heard about the high-speed rail and had a chance to vote on it and saw that it had passed and whatnot. But most of us don't really understand how it's going to be put into place and what the timetable is. And I think that at the time that Joel made those comments, I kind of got the impression that John Swicky had, and I don't want to mischaracterize the faces you're making, because he's pretty good at a poker face, and we're friends. But I got the impression that John had some questions, at least some reservation about some of the statements that were made. And of course, anybody might, because we don't know how much of it's set in concrete yet. I didn't need anybody to tell me that the state has the ability to take property on eminent domain and that they have no compunction about doing it. And I think it was my good friend Jamie Dunn who was giving you a bad time about possibly not doing a better job to highlight the potentiality for that high-speed rail maintenance train yard, which would dominate this project area. The area that SP used to have as a train yard, where the roundhouse is that we so dearly want to protect. I saw a visual, like an artist's rendering from high-speed rail, and I think it was dated 2009, and it may even be part of your EIR package. Do you know, John? Or, well, okay. Whether it's there or not, I'm sure you can find it. It looked to me like it pretty much takes up the whole old train yard, basically the same approach. So there's not much left after that in terms of anything north other than what's in San Francisco. And then it did seem to allow for the preservation of the roundhouse and the tank and boiler building, which is great for us who want to turn that into a museum. But there's no guarantees in anything. And then that means that all the valuable land, the most valuable land there, would be taken away from UPC. Now, Jamie was saying, well, who benefits? Well, if this EIR is passed, then I would suspect, and I'm not an expert at this, I would defer to the city attorney, but I'd suspect that the value of that land is going to go way up if this EIR is passed. And then if that happens, then when the state comes in and takes the land on eminent domain, UPC cashes a bigger check. And that could be a business strategy. So, and I'm not telling you what to do about it. To me, it doesn't matter, because all of it, we have no control. The state will take the land if they want it, and they'll pay, whether it's 2 cents or 4 cents, whatever it is, they'll pay it. And we'll all pay our share. But in terms of us thinking about what's practical and what we could do, it seems to me that potential for that train yard is an elephant that's too big to ignore, and we need to find some way to figure out what's what with that. Then on the other side of Tunnel Avenue or Tunnel Road, we call it Tunnel Road down here in San Francisco. They call it Tunnel Avenue all the way, and I can't figure out exactly how that works. But over there on the old dump site, I'm sure that land can be remediated and used for a number of things. It's just a matter of money in most cases. The people at Recology were telling me, it's Mark Arsenault, who's the San Francisco manager for Recology. He's saying that, we would have to go down 200 feet to put piers down to bedrock there. Well, every time they build a skyscraper in San Francisco, they go down like that, and build bridges and every other darn thing, they go down. So I'm not too worried about that. I'm sure that, where there's a profit motive, people will find an engineering solution. At the same time, as said before, we don't want housing out there, especially not on that section of the property. There was somebody who was talking about, again, the rail line, and how do you get across the rail line? Well, you either go over it with a bridge, you go under it with a tunnel, or you go across it with a railroad crossing. And the railroad crossing is probably the least attractive of those three alternatives. But again, that brings us back to what's going to happen with that. So I'm sorry I've taken so much of your time, but there's an awful lot here, and hopefully I've given you some food for thought. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay. Could we? Yes, please, quickly. So just to update everyone, so far we've had 19 speakers with a crossover between cultural and biological, and we can tabulate that later just to share with you all. Hi, Tom.
Tom Hines again. Based on the comments that Jamie Dunn made about all the hard work that the people have been doing, that you have been doing, that staff has been doing, I somewhat think is kind of moot for us to be going through this right now. the city has admitted that they are waiting for the specific plan in order to update the general plan. Shouldn't the very first question we ask ourselves, do we want to change their general plan? Most people that I've talked to think it's sufficient as is. That should be the first question we ask. Do we want to change our general plan? Then, since it's the blueprint for what happens, why does a developer come in, wants us to change our laws? You know, it's putting the cart before the horse. It really is. The number one question should be, do we want to change our general plan? Thank you.
Thank you.
I don't think it's putting the cart before the horse. I think it's killing the horse.
Okay. Joe?
Joel Diaz. Good evening, Honorable Planning Commissioners. So I wanted to talk about the process, talk about the document, just in general. It does apply to the biology, too, of it. But it's just my opinion, and I feel like I'm pretty fair and objective about a lot of different things. At least I try to be. I'm open to development, business, these kinds of things. People that know me know that about me. And you know, I find that this EIR is woefully inadequate, and I think there's no question about that. I think people tonight said there's not enough analysis, and you know, what I hear is an excuse that the reason why there's not enough analysis is because this is, you know, a program level EIR, and you know, for a giant project. And since it's a program level EIR, we worry about all the smaller, more specific EIRs later. Yet, at the same time, there's massive conceptual specificity about the buildings and the development that is going to go on there. And we know what that means, and we know what it takes to do those things, to build buildings like that, and the grading and the roads. And yet there's very little discussion and analysis about the environmental impacts and how we're affecting the biology. And so it seems like it's really out of whack. It seems really like an imbalance. And, you know, I don't see any peer review. And this is a giant project, and there's no peer review. You smaller projects, we have peer review all the time. And there's good reason for that, because the person that writes this report loses objectivity. It's their report. They develop biases over the course of working on this project. And it doesn't matter whether they're honest or their intentions are good or not. It's just going to happen. They're going to develop biases, and it's important to have an objective third-party opinion, peer review.
Can you talk more about peer review, what you see would be adequate peer review?
Well, to start, at least one other consultant to look at this, to look at what's been done, and to see if it's adequate in their opinion. It seems to me there's giant holes here, you know, for starters with the high-speed rail, you know, the Geneva overpass, the absence of analysis. And if we had that person here, I think these meetings could be more productive. I think it's totally unfair to put, I hear this is a 6,000-page document. I think it's unfair to put that in your lap. I think it's unfair to have you take notes and answer, be expected to record and then answer later possibly hundreds of questions without any expert consultation beyond what I've already said is, I think, is a cognitive bias from the existing consultant. And so, you know, I think that you people are all fair and objective people, and, you know, just like any normal person might be. But when someone tells you something's okay, then that kind of changes your mind. You're slanted, well, this is okay, this process is okay. And if you had done 10 projects this size, just like this, you guys would be really good at it. And you'd know what's okay and what's not okay. But you don't. This is the first one. And people are kind of telling you, yeah, this is okay, this is how you do it. It's a program level, it's really vague. There's no peer review, there's nobody else weighing in here. And just kind of wing it. And, and also familiarize yourself with 6,000 pages. Answer hundreds of questions that are extremely technical. Some of these people in the audience tonight are extremely intelligent and asking really difficult and good questions and things that make a lot of sense when I hear them say it. And these people, they're also very patient. To me, this is like somebody is intentionally giving this developer a pass, a lot of passes. So. In terms of the process, and the glaring problems that I see and omissions, I don't know how you feel about it and how you're going to feel at the end of this process, but I think there's enough reason here to suspend the process at this point and get a third-party opinion, to get peer review, to get other expert analysis to help you figure this out. If you guys feel competent and able to take on hundreds and hundreds of questions and then respond to that intelligently and then sign your name to this EIR and say that it's all good and it's been done correctly, well, that's your prerogative. But I don't think it's fair. I don't think it's fair for anybody to put you in that position. This is extremely complicated. It's extremely meaningful. It is a giant project. And this thing about a program level EIR, it doesn't wash. It's not right. I can assure you this is not right. So thank you.
Clara, please.
I just wanted to say how much I appreciated Joel Diaz's insightful comments. We don't really discuss the sort of psychological impacts of all that happens here very much. I had a question about the program EIR, which I guess I would hope that at some point would get answered, and that is that I have the impression that that anything that is not included in a program EIR and there is no change in the project, no appreciable change that would change the impacts, that you cannot bring something new that was not included in that. Yep. Mr. Jamil Jamil is shaking his head. Yes, I'm sorry. Really, I'm not supposed to address anybody, but I'm very curious about that. And if you consider what that might mean with something that's so complicated as this is. That's, seems to me to be a really serious issue that we all think about and talk about. Mm-hmm. And the other thing that I wanted to ask was, Mr. Zola in the past and even John Zwicky has mentioned the importance of, sort of separating out the planning and the EIR issues. Over and over again, we heard that over the past years. And now they're being joined. And I think that's kind of confusing and difficult. I don't know how else you could organize it, to be honest. But I think that the issue of whether or not the EIR is complete, as someone else has already said, is really a completely separate issue. And the planning issues have to do with something entirely different that should not be confused and mixed up together. Because even if you do think that the EIR is complete, that doesn't have really anything to do with the planning issue values. So I guess I would ask that, with your help, that the EIR issues and the planning issues be kind of separately dealt with, and so that it's clear, because now it's kind of foggy when you mix them together, when we've all been told for years to separate them. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Sorry, I have to add another thing. As chair of the Citizens Committee, one of our most laborious tasks was to analyze the traffic and transportation impacts. And
I'm just conveying the concern of the member of that committee who said that saw the schedule and this is coming up in 2 weeks, and there's just no way that the people who have looked at these issues before during the draft EIR level could be ready in 2 weeks to comment on all those impacts that are really, really significant and many unavoidable. So the schedule, you really should consider moving the traffic and transportation segment to a later date in your schedule. That's my request and a request of the people working very, very hard on draft EIR.
Anyone else?
Yeah.
Sorry, Joel Diaz again. I just have a couple more comments, and it's really overwhelming. I feel like my head's going to explode at some point. But the idea that we can just sort of disregard what the state wants to do with our property. I mean, I get it. We don't want to lose a really big financial resource, but sometimes things happen and they're beyond our control. And that desire to fight it and want to keep it and fight and do whatever we have to do, be deceptive, hide it from people, whatever it is, it basically stems from greed, right? It's greed. It's greed to hold on to something. And we all know, what happens from that kind of greed. And it's going to get us in trouble. And I think it's making us take shortcuts. I think it's making us do things that we know we probably shouldn't be doing. I think we really got to think about in terms of how the inception of this whole thing and how this whole thing is premised. It's sort of premised falsely to achieve a goal, an end goal of getting this development going and fighting the state and maybe getting some potential for revenue. And if it's not meant to be, it's not meant to be. It's nobody's fault. It's not your fault. It's not anybody's fault. It's just, this is the way it is. This is our location. This is where the train track is meant to go. The state is going to do these things. We'll be fine. There's other things we can do. We can have renewable energy on top of their maintenance facility. And that's a wonderful thing. It could generate millions of dollars a year. There's still other land that can be developed. And so I think we should dispense with all the deception and all the greed and all the things we want but maybe can't have, and start thinking about the things that we can have and the real options, the viable options that we have before us. And the environmental, this is an environmental impact report, right? And what I hear is a lot of everything but environmental stuff. It's just about the developer and about the city and the money and the building and all this stuff, not a whole lot about the environmental stuff. And I think that's what it really needs to be about. And the notion that, I'm also a contractor, and the notion that contractors are going to self-police themselves or anybody else is completely ludicrous. It's absolutely ludicrous. Happens all the time. It's proverbial. It's like the joke on the job site, getting away with destroying habitat, whatever. I've seen it. I've seen instances of it. I've heard lots of stories about it. It really does happen. You guys, your job is to make sure it doesn't happen. Set something up in such a way to guarantee that these things are going to be done and the environment's cared for. Thank you.
Okay.
Anyone else? Going once.
We have to continue the hearings because we're going to have the second session, so we don't have to close the hearings.
Yeah. Going twice. We want to make sure we're inclusive. Okay.
There's one person there who wants to talk.
No.
No, I think he's just counting.
He's just counting. Okay.
Along with me. Yeah. Okay. So, again, as Commissioner Manier mentioned, we are continuing this, and we really, truly appreciate your coming here and spending time with us and being engaged in the process. It is critical, and we really, really do take these things to heart, and we will share this with the staff. So I guess in total, 24 comments from a total of probably 20 people, and that's a wonderful thing. So we hope to see you at the next meeting, which is public hearing number 2, October 8th, geology, hazards and hazardous materials, hydrology, and water quality. And we would definitely take into consideration the suggestion that we reevaluate the scheduling in terms of the traffic and circulation / noise public hearing number 3. We would discuss that with the staff. So thank you very much.
I want to make one comment before we stop. I was stopped in the middle when I was trying to talk about the joint session, and I don't understand why. I don't think you heard my question completely before you stopped me. So please don't do that in future, because I do want to have my concerns, and I want to make sure that the message was given that we want to have a joint meeting with Planning Commission, and I think that's what's suggested here, right?
The joint with Open Space and
Open Space Committee.
And
so that's the comment I was going to make. I was not making a specific comment regarding somebody that said that, but I was kind of perturbed that you stopped me in the middle of it. So just to make sure that doesn't happen again.
Okay, so to wrap up the public hearing portion, I want to share with everyone that we did receive a letter from Heather Buckley, who is representing she's Associate Director of International Partnerships, and she is representing the windsurfing community. That issue is actually an issue for public hearing number 5, included in the recreation discussion. So that is to be held on October 29th. This is currently in the record, so at that point, this will be addressed. Okay.
One thing that was brought up that I think we could talk about is showing these public meetings fairly often on Channel 27. I think that sounds like an excellent idea. That was Jamie's suggestion. Thank you.
And also, you can convey the message to have the joint meeting with Open Space Committee. I think it was.
I don't know what meeting was even referred to, and if that's something that the commission wants to vote on I don't even know what the content, if it's a workshop, I'm not sure what exactly it is. But
I think they were going to come and discuss something in front of that's why I wanted to make the comment at that point.
That was for the meeting that was...
May I make a suggestion? I think what we're talking about is including that for public hearing number 7, where we have various organizations and applicants to come and speak to us. I think here it says other organizational presentations TBD, so I'm assuming that as the suggestions come in, that would be where it's placed. Is that correct?
Again, there's a couple things going on. That woman, as I understand, is part of UPC's team,
Yes.
and they're going to make a presentation at your workshop number, public hearing number, whatever it is. But it sounds like they were making a separate presentation to OSEC. And again, any presentation that is made to a public body, you're all invited to. It's not going to be a public hearing. OSEC is not having a public hearing on the Baylands, so that wouldn't be, there's no joint hearing because there's no public hearing. If they have a workshop and you can be invited to the workshop and you can attend the workshop, that's certainly, I don't know, I don't have any details about a date or the topic or anything beyond what I heard tonight.
So that was more an FYI for the public to participate if they so choose.
Yeah, the reason I mentioned that is because we are in the middle of this EIR, and it will be nice if then they can come and present it before us, because I don't know whether we can have separate session with the Open Space Committee, and we will be invited, no doubt about that. But I thought that it would be better to have a joint workshop or whatever the meeting they have.
Did you want to make a comment, Lloyd?
Yeah, there were a couple of things that came up in relation to UPC's biologists making a presentation. The 7th public hearing is already set up for the applicant's presentation, and realistically, if they want their biologist to make a presentation to the Planning Commission, that is the time to make it. And you then can invite OSEC to be here, but in terms of public hearing on the record for the Baylands, that 7th public hearing would be the appropriate place, not an OSEC workshop, because that doesn't become part of your public record.
Thank you for that clarification.
That's fine. I have no problem with that.
Thank you for that clarification. So did the commission have any other additional comments?
Okay, we have to go to this item.
Let's move on to the consent calendar. So before we make a motion to approve, does anyone have any suggestions as to anything that we would like to modify?
None.
No? So may I have a motion?
I make a motion to approve the consent calendar.
I second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, great. So on to oral communications. This is for the public to address the commission on any issues that is not on the agenda. Is there anyone who would like to do so?
None.
No? Okay. So, written communication. Oh, you do? Okay, great. Okay.
Anja Miller, I just wanted to say thank you for Greg to do all that work. That will really make it at least a little bit easier to read the final EIR. We just needed it so bad, and thank you so much for doing it. And I also thank staff for I was complaining that it was so many clicks to get to the final EIR on the city's website. And why not put it on a homepage? Right to that, and they did. And I really appreciate that response. That was, true response to the public, which you need now. And also the flexibility on the schedule. I really think that's extremely important. That it seems to be coming across everywhere in the public statements. And so in that sense, I mean, all the criticism you get, you should get some thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, written communications. Aside from the letter from Heather, we have no others, unless someone here has something I don't have.
This one here.
You want to read that out?
The Heart of San Mateo 2014 Annual Report.
Okay.
Opening door to our community, so it's very important for our community. So.
Thank you. Items initiated by the staff. There are none? Okay. Items initiated by the commission.
I actually want some update on the consultant that is going to be representing the new zoning. How's that proceeding, and how can we get involved?
The city council, there was a contract with MIG consultant to prepare the precise plan. There's going to be they'll have a booth down at Day at the Park on Saturday, so you get some basic information. Yes. And then there's going to be a bigger event on October 24th, which is a Saturday, and I think they'll have more information. We'll be rolling that out, details of that, the next few days, and certainly the commission's welcome to attend those events. And again, in terms of a formal, this is they're in a kind of a community outreach stage right now, and that's really where they are concentrating their efforts the next 45 days or so. They will have some stakeholder meetings, and I suspect there will be commission representation as part of those stakeholder groups that are interviewed. That has not been set yet, but we'll be revisiting that when that's coming up.
Are they going to come introduce themselves maybe before one of the meetings here?
We could do that. Sure.
I would like to meet them as soon as possible.
Okay.
I mean, we've invested a huge amount of time trying to zone for something that we probably all feel a little uncomfortable about. So I would, as soon as possible, like to meet them. And, and you're saying that they would just want one person from the Planning Commission as a stakeholder? I mean, we've been very involved all along. I would like to see the Planning Commission be much more involved in the process than maybe just to have a representative.
You say the Parkside Village you're talking about, right? And
well, it's the whole development.
Yes.
I mean, we haven't had any involvement at all with the Parkside Village or in the rezoning of some of the work loft areas. We have had a lot of involvement in rezoning and for low-cost housing, and and coming up with and thinking about what would be best for the people in Brisbane. And this is going to make huge impact on the way the town is going to be. And so, I just want to say that I personally want to be very involved, and I think that I would like as soon as possible to meet the people at MIG. I'll go down on Saturday and meet them, but I don't want to just have one representative from the Planning Commission. I want the Planning Commission to be involved in what is happening. I want to know as soon as possible what is the thinking, and I don't think we've even seen the TAP. Are we going to get at least a summary of what's going to, what the thinking is?
You can get if you don't have a copy of the TAP already, we can provide it to you. When we set up
the economic analysis and everything.
The TAP or I don't know what you're talking about, the economic analysis.
Okay.
The TAP is a standalone document. It's on the city's website. If any or all the commissioners need a copy, I'll be glad to present that to you or provide it. When the consultant comes out to meet with you, we can talk about what your level of involvement and the most efficient way for you to be involved in that process is.
I really appreciate your help, and I just want to have you help us relay that information to the council. I don't know how anyone else feels, but that's the way I feel.
No, I think I agree with you.
And so I would appreciate the planning staff, supporting us in this. We make these decisions, and then we have to see, the outcome. And so, I've always been nervous about the way that we are rezoning, and well, you've already heard that from me. So thank you very much.
Okay, any other issues from the commission?
No, that's it.
Okay. Can we have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn to the regular meeting of October 8th, 2015.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Good night. Thank you.
Thank you very much.